What do you see as your major responsibilities as a teacher or coach working with students?
My main responsibility, I feel like, is to find opportunity and provide it for those that qualify to be competing in certain things or trying for certain things. And then to help students recognize probably what their potential is. So that's on both ends of the spectrum. Like if you have a student that comes in and they're pretty talented at something, but they might have some holes in certain areas, it's your job to let them know where their downfalls are too. Not only to build them up, but to also let them know what they need to work on to get even better. So probably to maximize potential and then provide opportunity, I think are my two main, I feel like, jobs as a teacher.
Do you use methods you've learned from others, or did you develop your own system?
Well, I feel like if anybody were to say they developed their own system, that's not really true, because you're always, like, you have to learn from somewhere. Like, everybody was a beginner at some point, and they learned from somewhere what they liked and what they didn't like. And then you developed your own, maybe, system, but it's technically not your own. Like, you borrowed it from bits and pieces of other people, or of other people's ways of doing things. So I would say I've taken bits and pieces of what I've learned from my undergraduate experience, or even growing up riding, and then especially what I learned in grad school, what's worked. And then I've done like trial and error my first 3 years even in this job, what's worked and what doesn't work, and thrown away the things that don't. So I would say I've built my own system, but based off of what I've learned from other people.
Do you think it's important to get multiple experiences with many different coaches or trainers? Why or why not?
It depends. I think it depends on the phase you're in of riding. If you're starting out, you need to be with a solid individual or a solid program. Like, you need to be in the same program and progressing through that. Eventually, you might hit a point where you need to go somewhere else, and you need to learn maybe in a higher tier or a higher caliber style of riding. So an example of that would be like if you were to start out in the stock horse, showing at a beginner level, you might want to eventually do NRCHA one day, and that might not be, your coach might not be the same person that can get you to that point. You might have to go to somebody who specializes in that. So I would say, based on the original question, it's a good idea once you get more advanced to get information from anyone you can, but be careful on who you trust the information from. So you need to have your people you fall back on, where you're like, I know what they tell me is probably going to work. This is a good idea. This is a good method. Versus just blindly trusting anyone because of their status or, the kind of horse they ride or things like that.
Does competition play a major part in your teaching system? Why or why not?
I would say the component of judging plays a pretty big role. Like, the way that I feel like I teach is based off of, sometimes judging at the higher level is based off of what the judge might see. So I say things a lot of the times, like, from a judge's perspective, they would give you probably a -1/2 maneuver because of this, or X, Y, and Z, and explain why. So that when you get in the competition, you're like, okay, I scored this way. You already have a score in your mind, of what your performance was, so that you're not like disappointed when you come out of the pen, and this is what your placing is. You're very prepared for what your score is going to be. So I think competition has to play a role in your teaching, because why would you, like, what is the purpose when you're teaching a competitive team? Like, if I'm coaching a team, our goal is to perform well. So that maybe, at the end, it might end up being a first place ribbon, but that's not the literal goal. The literal goal is to have adequate maneuvers and, and have high scores and be happy with our performances, and that ends up getting us to be competitive.
Where does winning fit in, and what does winning mean to you?
I guess I kind of answered that, but winning probably fits in more so in a way where somebody sees their own progress. So if you come out of the pen and you're like, well, I'm not really sure how I did, or you think you did really bad, or maybe you think you did really great, but you are completely blind to the fact that it might have been the opposite. Like, you're not sure how you're doing because you're not aware of your performance. Like, you just went out there and you did it and you're not quite sure what happened. I think winning is when you start realizing it on your own, and you come out and you realize the progress you made, or you think about, for me at least, it's thinking year or two back. Where were you a year ago? You know, where are you now compared to then? Are you still the same rider? And if you progress, that's winning, I think, kind of in itself.
What level do you teach?
All over the place, really. I mean, I really kind of tackle the very beginners for the horse science program. I teach the basic horsemanship. I teach veterans who are considered to be very beginner. And then I assist with lessons, which kind of range from your beginner all the way up to your open level riders. Teaching stock horse, I would say, are more advanced riders, some intermediate. So kind of all over the place. But I would probably put the average student I teach is probably more intermediate.
Which is your favorite to teach and why?
My favorite level to teach?
Yes.
I'm not sure I have a favorite level. I have a favorite, like, personality type. So I really enjoy teaching people who might be not the best rider ever, but they want to figure out how to be a better one. Like, they're actively seeking new methods or ways to better their horse, ways to better their form, their effectiveness. But usually those people tend to be, so far for me, the intermediate kind of range of riders. Like, they're not maybe the most skilled riders ever yet, but they're probably going to be in a shorter amount of time because of their efforts.
What gives you the greatest satisfaction in teaching or coaching?
The greatest satisfaction is probably when I see a rider come out of the pen and accomplish something that's been a really hard, like, struggle for them. So that can be a rider that might have issues with even picking up the right lead. Like, they didn't know their leads, and they've been learning their leads. They come out and they realize they didn't miss a single lead. Like, they know they didn't. You didn't have to tell them that. So small things like that where they can recognize their own ability. So when people start to recognize what they can do and what they're capable of doing, I feel like I feel pretty accomplished.
What causes you the most stress while teaching?
While teaching, anytime a safety is being compromised, that causes me some stress. So if you've got, a runaway horse or a rider that's kind of clenching down, causing that horse to run off, they don't know an emergency brake, or they don't remember it, riders that get into freeze position, they just really kind of putting themselves in a dangerous situation, that probably causes me the most stress. I don't come across that too much, luckily, but it's happened probably 2 or 3 times. Otherwise, other stressful things I feel like are riders who put a lot of pressure on themselves, versus just focusing on smaller goals at a time. But putting pressure on, like, the entire class. So, like, going in and saying, well, I need to win. I'm like, well, that's kind of stressful because it's really hard to break that apart and say, like, that's not the goal. That's what are smaller goals to get you there. It's stressful when you can't get through to a person to change their goals.
How do you handle problems in discipline with students?
So, like, somebody's acting out or needs to be reprimanded?
Like, somebody on your competitive team that has potential but doesn't have the discipline to keep up with things. Does that make sense?
I think, at least, I like to think I'm pretty straightforward about that. So if I have somebody who's slacking off, basically, or doesn't show up, or doesn't put the effort in, let's say you kind of have somebody who hops on the horse and doesn't really ride it. Like, they walk, trot, canter, they're not putting effort in. I pretty much call them out. I mean, I'm not saying in front of a whole group necessarily. There might be 2 or 3 people around, but I have a face-to-face conversation and say, like, look, if you want to get better, you've got to put the work in. You have to do these exercises. You have to be pretty adamant and repetitive to get better and to get anywhere. And if I see, very rarely have I seen somebody just completely fall off the grid, but if they do, I let them fall off the grid. If they want to come back, they come back. But I also make sure that I see if there's any outside influences. So is there a stressor outside of, the practice that's making them behave a certain way? Is there, whether it's financial, family, something like that. I don't want to get into somebody's personal business, but sometimes that's affecting their riding ability or their ability to come to practices or things like that. And I always take that into consideration.